The courtroom was silent. Not the usual kind of silence that settles over a room when a judge enters or a lawyer rises to speak. This was heavier, filled with tension, the kind that wraps around your chest and won't let go. Everyone was waiting. Waiting for something, anything. And then, without a word, the girl, barely 12 years old, lifted her hand ever so slightly. She didn't speak. She hadn't spoken a single word the entire trial. But the moment her fingers moved in a quiet, practiced gesture, her dog, sitting calmly by her feet, stood up, locked eyes with her, and did something that no one in that room was expecting. What happened next changed everything. Even the judge, known for his strict, no-nonsense demeanor, sat back in his chair, stunned into silence. Just moments earlier, most people in that courtroom didn't even believe the girl had a voice. Not just her voice in the literal sense. She was known to be selectively mute, but also her voice as a person, a presence, someone whose truth mattered. But that day, everything shifted, all because of a quiet signal and a bond no one else could fully understand. Her name was Lily, small for her age, with wide, observant eyes and an expression that rarely changed. She had this quiet strength about her, like she saw more than she let on. And at her side was Shadow, her therapy dog. A sleek black Labrador with a calm energy, always alert but never jumpy, like he knew he had a job to do and took it seriously. They had been inseparable since Lily was 7, when everything in her life fell apart. Since then, Shadow wasn't just her emotional support, he was her anchor, her protector, and in many ways, her voice. That day in court was supposed to be just another hearing in a long, complicated case involving her family. Most people thought Lily wouldn't, or couldn't, say anything. Her file even said non-verbal in bold letters. But what they didn't understand was that silence doesn't mean absence, and quiet doesn't mean powerless. The room was filled with the usual court players, lawyers scribbling notes, the judge peering over his glasses, a few bored attendees sitting in the back row. And then there was Lily, sitting still, hands folded in her lap, Shadow curled beside her like a shadow in form as well as name. Nobody expected her to participate. She hadn't said anything in previous hearings. She barely looked up. And yet, there was something about her stillness, something watchful, like she was waiting for the right moment. The case had taken so many turns that even the judge was growing weary. The adults talked in circles, about custody, about safety, about whether Lily should stay with one family member or another. And through it all, Lily had stayed silent. Until now. There was a break in the proceedings. The lawyer speaking had paused, flipping through some documents, and that's when Lily did it. Just a tiny movement, 3 fingers tapping lightly on her knee, then a flick of her wrist. Barely noticeable, unless you knew what to look for, and Shadow did. Without hesitation, Shadow rose and walked toward the stand. He didn't bark or make a scene. He simply turned, looked straight at the judge, and sat. Alert, attentive, and calm. But it was clear he wasn't just moving on a whim. He was responding to a command, a silent one only he and Lily understood. At first, everyone was confused, then curious. And then, everything changed. The judge leaned forward. "Is this a trained signal?" he asked, looking at the handler nearby, who nodded slowly, clearly surprised herself. The room was suddenly alive with whispers, the air buzzing with questions. What had the girl signaled? What did the dog understand? And why did it matter so much? Then came the testimony no one expected, not from Lily, but about her. The handler, and later a psychologist who had worked with Lily, explained how she used hand signals to communicate with Shadow, especially when she was overwhelmed or afraid to speak, and in moments when she felt unsafe. She had trained Shadow to act, to alert, to show the truth she couldn't put into words. That single gesture was Lily's way of saying something she hadn't been able to for years. And Shadow, he delivered it perfectly. The judge listened, his expression shifting from curiosity to concern, and finally to something softer, something almost protective. For the first time, Lily's silence spoke louder than any argument made in that courtroom. Her signal, that one small motion, told them more than pages of testimony ever could. It told them where she felt safe, and maybe more importantly, where she didn't. The entire courtroom watched in awe. Some of them moved to tears as Lily gently placed her hand on Shadow's back. She didn't smile, but her fingers curled slightly, the way they always did when she was trying to stay calm. And Shadow, always attuned to her, leaned into her touch just enough to let her know he understood. Lily was only 7 when she stopped speaking. Before that, she was just like any other kid, bright, curious, a little shy, but always with a quiet smile. Her favorite thing in the world had been story time with her mom, curled up on the couch under a fuzzy blanket, her head resting against her shoulder while the words floated through the room like music. But everything changed the night her world turned upside down. Details of what happened weren't always shared in full, even in court, but what was clear was that something broke inside her. Something so deep that words no longer felt safe. And so, the silence began. She went to therapy. She saw doctors, counselors, specialists. They all tried to coax her voice back with soft questions and bright toys, but Lily stayed quiet. Not because she didn't want to speak, but because she couldn't. Not yet. Every time someone pushed her, she'd shut down more. Until one day, a therapist suggested something different. Not another appointment, not another test, but a dog. At first, Lily didn't react to the idea. She just stared at the floor, gently kicking her shoes together. But the moment Shadow walked into the room for the first time, something shifted. He didn't make a sound. He didn't push or crowd her. He just sat nearby, watching her with those calm, steady eyes, as if he already understood that Lily needed space and patience. And somehow, that was enough. Shadow was no ordinary dog. He'd been trained to work with children who had anxiety, trauma, and selective mutism. But even his handlers were surprised by how quickly he connected with Lily. Within a week, she was feeding him by hand. Within 2, she was brushing his fur and letting him sleep near her bed. And within a month, she had started teaching him signals, hand motions she invented herself, to tell him when she was scared, when she needed help, or even when she just wanted him to stay close. Those silent signals became her language. While Lily still didn't speak, she began to express herself again. At home, at school, and in therapy, Shadow was her voice. If Lily was uncomfortable, Shadow would stand between her and the source of the tension. If she was overwhelmed, he'd press against her gently to help her ground herself. And if she needed space, he'd guide others away. Most people didn't even notice the signals at first, but Shadow did. Always. Her teachers noticed the change. She still didn't talk, but her drawings became more expressive. She participated more, even if just with a nod or a gesture. Her foster mother, a kind woman named Carol, said it was like watching a flower begin to bloom after years in the cold. Slowly, bit by bit, Lily was coming back, but the shadows of her past hadn't let go yet. The custody battle had been dragging on for nearly a year, complicated, messy, confusing, even for the adults involved. There were family members who said they wanted what was best for Lily, but their stories didn't always match. One relative, in particular, had been pushing hard for custody, someone who had previously been involved in Lily's life but hadn't seen her in years. Their sudden interest raised red flags for Carol and for Lily's caseworker, but proving what was really going on was difficult, especially with Lily not speaking. That's why the courtroom moment had mattered so much. That silent signal and Shadow's reaction weren't just emotional, they were evidence. Subtle, maybe, but powerful. For the first time, Lily's truth had been seen, not through spoken testimony, but through action. And the judge? He noticed. The entire room did. But the story wasn't over yet. After that court session, things got even more intense. The attorneys began digging deeper into the relative's background. Records that had been overlooked started to come to light. A few things didn't add up. Timelines were questioned. People who were once confident in their statements began to fumble when asked specifics. And still, Lily said nothing. But her eyes watched everything. Carol, who had been caring for Lily for nearly a year by then, became more protective than ever. She wasn't just a foster parent anymore. She was family. And Lily, in her quiet way, had grown to trust her. Carol could read her body language almost as well as Shadow could. She knew when Lily was afraid, when something was wrong, or when she just needed quiet. Together, the three of them, Lily, Carol, and Shadow, formed a kind of unspoken circle, one that was tight, calm, and hard to break. But not everyone was happy with the way things were going. The relative pursuing custody began acting strange, according to court records. More aggressive in emails, more demanding in court. At one point, a formal complaint was filed about the judge's handling of the case, though it was dismissed. Still, it was clear, pressure was building. Something wasn't right, and everyone could feel it. As the final court date approached, the weight of everything started to press down on everyone involved. You could feel it in the way people moved around the courthouse, quieter than usual, with more sideways glances and tighter conversations. Something was building, an invisible storm just waiting for the right moment to break. And right at the center of it all was Lily, the silent girl who had already said so much without ever speaking a word. Carol noticed the shift in Lily in those last few days. She was more restless at night, often pacing her room with Shadow trailing close behind. Sometimes she'd sit in the dark with her notebook, drawing in long, careful strokes, not the usual fun sketches of flowers or animals, but shapes that seemed heavier, darker, scenes she never explained. And she still used her signals with Shadow. But she was adding new ones too. Subtle changes. A quick tap on her wrist. A wave of her hand under her sleeve. It was clear she was preparing for something. At the same time, Carol was fighting her own battle. She was worried, not just for Lily, but for what might happen if the wrong person got custody. The more they uncovered about the relative pushing for guardianship, the more disturbing the picture became. Past financial trouble, inconsistent stories, and then there were the reports, not concrete enough to bring charges, but unsettling enough to raise real concern. Still, none of it was enough on its own. They needed more. They needed something undeniable. And somehow, everyone knew that the key to unlocking the truth was still hidden with Lily. Meanwhile, the court-appointed child advocate, a woman named Ms. Reyes, had been visiting Lily regularly. She was kind, patient, and never forced Lily to speak. She just sat with her, asked soft questions, and gave her space. Over time, Lily began to trust her, even if she still didn't talk. Once, she handed Ms. Reyes a drawing, a picture of a small girl holding hands with a black dog while a shadowy figure loomed in the background. Ms. Reyes didn't ask for an explanation. She just tucked the picture into her folder and kept coming back. She was one of the few adults who seemed to really see Lily, not as a file or a case, but as a person trying to be heard in her own way. On the other side of the case, the relative, let's call him Mr. D, was growing more frustrated. In court, he put on a smile, spoke in polite tones, talked about family bonds and second chances, but behind closed doors, his behavior was slipping. There were reports from his apartment complex of late-night arguments, phone calls that didn't match up. One day, Carol received an anonymous envelope in the mail. Inside was a photocopy of a handwritten note that simply said, "She belongs with her own blood." No name. No return address. But the message was clear. Carol reported it, of course, but there wasn't much the authorities could do without proof of who sent it. Still, all signs pointed to Mr. D becoming desperate, and desperation can make people reckless. In the middle of all this, Lily continued to prepare, not just emotionally, but in ways that no one fully understood yet. Shadow became even more in tune with her behavior. He started sleeping by her door every night. In the mornings, he would stand by her until she finished each bite of breakfast, almost like he was making sure she was strong enough for something coming. It was like he knew something big was about to happen, like he was waiting for her cue. Lily's therapist, who had been working with her for almost a year, believed she was building towards something, some kind of breakthrough. But she warned Carol and the legal team not to push it. "It has to come from her," she said gently. "If she's going to tell us what happened, she'll do it her way, on her terms." That was the tricky part. Everyone felt the urgency, the need for truth before the court made a final ruling. But the only person who really held that truth was Lily, and she was still choosing silence. Then, something strange happened. During a quiet session with her therapist, Lily passed over another drawing. This one showed two different homes. One was drawn in soft colors, warm lights in the windows, with Shadow sleeping by the door. The other was darker, jagged lines around the edges, and in the corner, a small girl with no mouth drawn on her face. No features, just blank. And at the bottom, in shaky handwriting, were 2 words. Asterisk, he knows. Asterisk. That drawing sent a ripple through the case team. Who was he? Was she referring to Mr. D? Was it a warning? A clue? Carol sat with that image for hours, heart pounding. The truth was just out of reach, right there in front of them, but still buried under layers of trauma and fear. And every day that passed without answers brought them closer to the final hearing, where a decision would be made, one way or another. The morning of the final hearing was unusually still. The sky was overcast, a soft gray that seemed to press against the windows like a warning. Inside the courthouse, the halls buzzed with a quiet tension, like everyone was holding their breath. Carol sat on a bench just outside the courtroom with Lily beside her. Shadow lay at Lily's feet, alert but calm, his ears occasionally twitching at passing footsteps. Lily clutched the corner of his leash, her knuckles pale, but her face was steady, not afraid, just waiting. Carol leaned over and whispered something, but Lily didn't respond. She just gave a small nod. It was the same kind of nod she gave when she wanted to go home, or when she understood something too deep to say out loud. Carol squeezed her hand and didn't say anything else. She knew better than to push. Everyone did. Today had to go exactly the way Lily needed it to. Inside the courtroom, the energy shifted the second they entered. The judge looked more serious than usual. The attorneys were poised, flipping through notes and scanning documents, but there was a heaviness in the room no one could shake. Mr. D sat stiffly at his table, a forced smile plastered on his face. He didn't glance at Lily, not once, but Lily looked at him. And for a moment, her fingers tightened around Shadow's leash again. The hearing began with procedural updates, but no one was really listening. Everyone knew the real moment was coming. The judge reviewed past statements, redressed the custody petitions, and asked clarifying questions, but it was all leading to one thing: Lily. Whether she spoke or not, whether she revealed anything today, this was her moment. Every eye in the room turned toward her when the judge finally said her name. Lily, I understand you don't want to speak, and that's okay. No one here is going to force you. But I also know you've been communicating in your own way. If there's anything you want to share, through a drawing, through a signal, however you feel safe, you have this space. Take your time. The room went completely still. Lily didn't move at first, not even a blink. Then, slowly, she stood up. Shadow stood too, instinctively, as if they were one. She walked forward, her steps small but steady. The courtroom was silent except for the soft padding of her shoes on the floor. She stopped in the center, just a few feet from the judge's bench. Carol's heart was in her throat. So was Ms. Reyes's. Even the attorneys had paused their note-taking. Everyone knew that whatever Lily did next would matter, and yet no one could guess what it would be. Lily reached into the pocket of her sweater and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She didn't hand it to the judge. Instead, she held it out for Ms. Reyes, who came forward and gently took it. Then Lily backed away again, her eyes never leaving Shadow. He stayed right at her side, calm and strong. Ms. Reyes opened the paper carefully. It was a drawing, but different from the ones before. It was detailed, almost painfully so. On one side was a little girl with a dog, both standing under a beam of light. On the other side, a shadowy figure loomed over a small bed, with a heavy hand reaching toward it. In the bottom corner, written in Lily's shaky handwriting, were 3 words, asterisk, it was him. Asterisk. Gasps echoed quietly around the courtroom. The judge looked down at the paper, his expression unreadable. Mr. D shifted in his seat, his face suddenly pale. The attorney next to him leaned in, whispering urgently, but he didn't respond. Then Lily did something no one expected. She dropped to her knees and made a signal, one that only Shadow and a few others understood. It was the same one she had made that first day in court. A silent message. A warning. Shadow barked once. Loud, sharp, protective, and he stepped between Lily and Mr. D with his body low and eyes locked. Security stepped forward on instinct, unsure of what was happening. But the judge held up a hand. "Let them be," he said calmly. Lily stayed kneeling, one hand resting on Shadow's back. She didn't look scared. She looked certain, like she had finally finished what she came here to do. The tension in the room was unbearable now. No one spoke. No one moved. Everyone was watching Lily, watching Shadow, and watching the slow collapse of Mr. D's carefully built image. The lies, the charm, the petitions, it all started to crack. Not because of a scream or a dramatic speech, but because a little girl who had once lost her voice had found a way to speak without it. The judge took a long breath and looked at the paper again, then at Lily. Something had shifted, something big, but he didn't say anything yet. The courtroom was still frozen in that moment. A single breath, held at the edge of a cliff. The truth was hanging in the air. Everything they'd been building toward, every silent cry, every careful drawing, every signal, every bark, had led to this. And what happened next? Just when everyone thought Lily's drawing and Shadow's reaction were the peak of the hearing, something completely unexpected happened. The judge, still holding the picture in his hands, leaned forward slowly and cleared his throat. His voice was calm, but there was something different in his tone now, something sharp beneath the surface. "I want to call a short recess," he said. "But before we do, I'm requesting that a certain sealed document be brought to my chambers. It was submitted during the early stages of this case, but never reviewed due to lack of authorization. I believe we need to take a closer look now." There was a pause. Then quiet murmurs rippled through the room as the clerk stood and left to retrieve the document. Carol exchanged a worried glance with Ms. Reyes. Even the defense attorney looked unsettled. Mr. D tried to play it off, but his leg was bouncing beneath the table. Lily stayed exactly where she was, one hand still resting on Shadow's back, her eyes steady. The recess was short, but it felt endless. When the judge returned, he was holding a file, thin but clearly important. He didn't sit right away. Instead, he remained standing as he addressed the court. "This document," he began, "contains an anonymous letter sent months ago by someone claiming to have witnessed an incident involving the child and the petitioner, Mr. D. At the time, the letter was dismissed due to lack of corroborating evidence. But in light of the new drawing and the girl's consistent signals, I believe it's time to revisit it." A hush fell over the courtroom. The judge opened the folder and read aloud. The letter was simple, written in shaky handwriting, but its message hit like thunder. "I saw him come into her room that night. I heard her crying but was too scared to say anything then. I'm sorry, I can't stay silent anymore." There was no name, no return address, just the words and the shame between the lines. And for the first time since the trial began, Mr. D visibly lost his composure, his face twisted. He leaned toward his lawyer, whispering harshly. The lawyer tried to calm him, but the damage was already done. The mask was slipping. And then, another shock. From the back of the courtroom, someone stood up, a young woman, nervous, fidgeting. She held a worn-out folder in her hands. "Your Honor," she said, her voice barely steady, "I think I can help confirm what that letter says." The room turned to her. The judge motioned for her to approach. She introduced herself as a former babysitter who had worked briefly for Lily's extended family. Including Mr. D, she hadn't come forward before, afraid of retaliation. But after seeing the news about the hearing and recognizing Lily's name, she said she couldn't stay quiet anymore. She brought with her a collection of journal entries, notes she had written back then, detailing moments that had never sat right with her. One in particular described Lily waking up screaming in the middle of the night, unable to speak but pointing toward the door in terror. At the time, the babysitter thought maybe it was just a nightmare. But now, seeing everything unfold, she knew it had been something more. The courtroom fell into stunned silence again. The judge took the folder, his expression grave. Mr. D's lawyer stood quickly, requesting a delay, a private discussion, anything to slow the moment down. But it was too late. The truth, quiet as it was, had started unraveling fast. And then, the twist no one saw coming. Shadow, still standing beside Lily, began growling. Low and deep, not like before. Not a protective bark. This was different. His eyes were focused on someone else now. Not Mr. D, not the babysitter, but a man sitting quietly in the back row. Older, well-dressed, pretending to be just another observer. Everyone turned to look at him. He didn't move. Lily turned her head slowly, eyes narrowing. She made a signal. One no one had seen before. Shadow lunged, not to attack, but to block. To place himself between Lily and that man, the same way he had always done when danger was near. The bailiff stepped forward immediately, tension high, but the man didn't flinch. He stood up and calmly said, "I think it's time I speak to the court." The judge paused. "And you are?" The man looked at Lily, then at the judge. "My name is Charles Benton. I'm Lily's grandfather. Her real grandfather." Whispers exploded. Carol's heart dropped. The name hadn't come up once. According to all the records, Lily's grandparents were either deceased or out of the picture. But this man wasn't in any of the files. No phone calls. No requests. Nothing. He continued, "I've been trying to stay out of this. I didn't want to make things worse. But I've been watching the case closely. And I know things about Mr. D, things no one has brought forward yet. I think it's time the court knew everything." The judge nodded slowly. "Then take the stand." Charles Benton stepped up to the stand with a heavy stillness, like he was carrying years of regret. The courtroom was dead silent. Even Mr. D had stopped trying to whisper to his attorney. All eyes were on the man claiming to be Lily's real grandfather, someone no one had seen or heard from until now. Lily's expression didn't change much, but something flickered behind her eyes. Confusion, recognition, maybe even hope. Shadow stayed glued to her side, unmoving. Charles cleared his throat, and in a low, gravelly voice, he began. "I stayed away for too long. I know that. After my daughter passed, things got complicated. I wasn't in a good place. I wasn't ready to raise a child, and honestly, I thought others would do what was right for Lily. I was wrong." He paused, his eyes briefly meeting Lily's. "I had no idea she ended up with him, my late son-in-law's cousin. That man had issues for years. We kept our distance from him for a reason. If I had known sooner, I would have come forward." The judge asked for proof of identity. Charles handed over several documents, birth certificates, guardianship papers never filed, even a notarized letter written by Lily's mother before her death, naming Charles as a preferred guardian if anything happened to her. Everyone in the room could feel the air shift as the judge flipped through the papers. Carol leaned toward Ms. Reyes, whispering, "This could change everything." And it did feel that way. For the first time in this entire journey, there was a clear path forward. Someone who had a right to step in. Someone Lily might actually be safe with. But then Charles said something no one expected. "Before we move forward, I think there's something Lily needs to see. Something I found recently in my daughter's things. I wasn't sure what it meant at first, but now I think it'll help her find the last piece of what she's been holding onto." He pulled a small envelope from his coat and handed it to the judge. Inside was a faded photograph. The judge examined it carefully before passing it to Ms. Reyes, who then brought it to Lily. She took it slowly, her fingers trembling just slightly. Shadow leaned against her, sensing the shift. Lily looked at the photo and froze. The courtroom watched her, holding its collective breath. The photo showed Lily as a toddler, sitting in a woman's lap, her mother. Next to them, smiling softly, was Mr. D, but he wasn't looking at the camera. He was staring at Lily, and the expression on his face wasn't kind. It wasn't the kind of photo you'd frame. It was the kind you kept buried. Suddenly, Lily stood up. Her body was tense, her breathing shallow. But her eyes were locked on Mr. D. She pointed at him. Then she pointed to the photo. Then she reached down, made a signal with her hand, one that meant danger. One that meant remember asterisk. Shadow barked again, louder this time. Not a warning, but a declaration. And just like that, the judge had seen enough. "I'm placing Mr. D under investigation," he said. "The court will not proceed with his custody petition. Effective immediately, Lily will be placed in temporary protective care under Mr. Charles Benton, pending further review." Mr. D stood abruptly, his face red with rage, but the bailiff was already at his side. "You have no idea what you're doing," he barked. "She's manipulating everyone. No, the judge replied calmly. She's protecting herself, something you clearly never did. As Mr. D was escorted out, the tension in the room finally released. People started to breathe again. Carol wiped her eyes quietly. Ms. Reyes squeezed Lily's shoulder. Shadow lay down beside her, tail wagging just once. It felt like the ending everyone had waited for. But just as the judge was preparing to close the hearing, Charles spoke up again. There's one more thing. It's about the drawing Lily made, the one that said asterisk he knows. Asterisk, I don't think she was just talking about Mr. D. I think she was referring to someone else entirely. Someone still out there. The room went quiet again. The judge tilted his head. Who? Charles looked down, his voice dropping. There was another person living with Mr. D for a while. A man he claimed was just a roommate. But I recently found out that man was fired from a school for misconduct years ago. He moved often, kept a low profile. I have a name, but no proof. Not yet. The judge nodded slowly, his face tightening. Then this case is far from over. Lily, hearing all of this, looked toward the courtroom exit. Her hand clenched around the photo, and for the first time all day, a tear slipped down her cheek. The truth had come out. The danger had been stopped, for now. But in that final moment, everyone realized something chilling. This wasn't just about Lily's past. It was about what? An asterisk who was still hiding in the shadows. And Shadow, ever faithful, didn't take his eyes off the door. The courtroom slowly emptied after the final words were spoken, but the air still felt thick with everything that had just happened. Lily remained seated, her small hand still gripping the photo tightly. Shadow rested his head on her lap, his tail flicking gently every now and then, like he was reminding her it was okay to breathe now. Carol stood nearby with Ms. Reyes, both of them watching over Lily, both of them trying to process the weight of it all. Outside the courthouse, the media had started to gather. But the judge had ordered privacy protections. Lily wouldn't have to speak to anyone. No cameras, no microphones, just quiet. She'd had enough noise for a lifetime. Charles walked with her down the courthouse steps, staying a few paces behind, not pushing. He carried the responsibility of his absence with him. But he also carried something else now. Hope. Maybe he couldn't change the past, but he could fight for her future. Back at Carol's house that evening, things were still. Not silent, but still. Lily sat in the corner with her crayons, drawing again, not shadows this time, but trees and grass, and shadow running across a field. It was the first drawing in weeks that didn't feel heavy. Carol hung it on the fridge without saying a word, letting the moment speak for itself. Ms. Reyes called to update them that Mr. D was in custody, and that more evidence was already being uncovered. As for the mysterious man Charles mentioned, the roommate, authorities had launched a separate investigation. Nothing was confirmed yet, but his name was flagged in old complaints from other counties. The system was finally catching up. It was slow, it was flawed, but it was moving in the right direction. In the following weeks, Lily began adjusting to life with Charles. It was awkward at first, two strangers tied together by blood and pain. But he showed up every single day. He learned the signals Lily had created with Shadow. He asked permission before touching her drawings. He never raised his voice. He made mistakes, sure, but he never made the same one twice. And Shadow, he never left her side. He wasn't just a therapy dog anymore. He was family. At Charles's place, he had his own bed, his own food bowl, and a spot under the table where he liked to curl up when Lily read books out loud, slowly sounding out the words with patience and care. The girl who once couldn't say a single word in court now read bedtime stories to her dog. The court officially granted temporary guardianship to Charles after a few weeks. The permanent hearing was set for later in the year, but no one doubted the outcome. Lily smiled more. She didn't speak much, but she didn't need to. Her eyes said everything. She was safe now, and more than that, she was starting to heal. One day, she handed Charles a new drawing. It was her and him, standing on a hill, with shadow between them and the sun rising in the background. In the sky, she'd written two simple words, asterisk thank you. Asterisk, Charles had to turn away so she wouldn't see the tears. Carol still checked in weekly, dropping off puzzles and baked treats. Ms. Reyes visited too, but not as a caseworker anymore, just as someone who'd grown to care. They all agreed that Lily had changed them. Her silence had been louder than any scream. Her courage stronger than any testimony. People online started to hear parts of the story once it became public record. Not the whole thing, never the personal details, but just enough to remind people that some heroes don't wear capes. Some walk on four legs, bark at the right time, and stand guard when no one else can. Shadow became a symbol of trust, loyalty, and silent strength. And Lily? She became something even more powerful, a voice for those who couldn't speak. Schools and advocacy groups began sharing her story, carefully, respectfully, to train teachers and counselors on how to spot quiet cries for help. Because sometimes, healing doesn't start with a word. Sometimes, it starts with a drawing, a look, or the gentle paw of a dog who just knows. As for the final twist, the other man involved. He was eventually tracked down. The investigation took months, but with Charles's help and Lily's early clues, justice began to take shape. It wasn't over yet, but this time, the right people were watching. Lily stood taller now. She still carried the past, but it didn't weigh her down. It gave her roots. And as she walked beside Shadow, heading into another ordinary day with her grandfather at her side, she looked back just once, at the road behind her. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply turned back around and kept walking forward. Because the silent girl had already said everything she needed to. And the world had finally listened.